You're looking at pictures of a guy by the name of Jay Moriarty, and here you can see his name. He kind of came to fame in the early 90s for surfing a big wave break in Northern California called Mavericks, and he ended up on the cover of Surfer magazine for wiping out on a giant wave. And so here is a picture of him taking off on the wave, and here is a picture of him going into the wipeout, which is kind of a cool photo. And that was in Surfer magazine in the early 90s. And the reason I mention that is because here is Mavericks, that big wave break right over here in Half Moon Bay in California. And then over here is San Francisco Bay Area, and here's the Silicon Valley. And here, right there, is One Infinite Loop in Cupertino, the headquarters for Apple Computer. And Apple is naming their next version of their operating system. They are naming it OS X Mavericks. So in this video, one last thing to say about Jay Moriarty. If you ever saw the movie Chasing Mavericks, Surfing Mavericks, Chasing Mavericks, that was sort of loosely based on his life. There we go, Chasing Mavericks. Anyhow, I never surfed it. In another life, in another time. And the next version is OS X. So we're going to be talking about operating systems in this video and the different types that are out there in the market, some of the most common types. And for the desktop PC or the desktop laptop category, the most common types are the Mac OS and Windows, Microsoft Windows and Mac OS. And the Mac OS, this is an interesting thing. If you read about it on Wikipedia, early versions of Mac OS were compatible only with Motorola 68000 family Macintoshes. So notice how specific that is. It's talking about the CPU. Which CPU? So the early versions of the Mac operating system were only compatible with this CPU right here. As Apple introduced computers with PowerPC hardware, the OS was ported to support this architecture. What is PowerPC? It's probably means it's the instruction set, right? The instruction set here, which would also allow, at some point, allow Windows to run on it also. But the thing that's interesting to me about this is just that operating systems are CPUs specific. All right, so history of Mac OS. Here's like the early Mac OS. That's kind of what it looked like. That was like back in the early 90s. Totally remember that. And now we've got different flavors of OS X, which is making use of BSD code. And BSD stands for Berkeley Software Development, which we heard about a little bit in one of the previous lectures, videos. Here are the different versions of Mac OS X. The most recent version is Mavericks. Before that was Mountain Lion. Before that was Lion. Excuse me. Before that was Snow Leopard. Before that Leopard. Before that Tiger. Before that Panther. Before that Jaguar. Before that Puma. Before that Cheetah. That's all Mac OS X. Different versions of it. And now we're at Mavericks. So that's the Apple operating system. Here we have Windows, which is not as good, just straight out. It's a crappier operating system. It always has been. It's more likely to crash and it has more bugs. And it's just not as cool, but it's okay. I'm using it right now. So same with Internet Explorer, crappier browser. Use Google Chrome and use Apple Mac operating systems, Apple's, and with running a Mac operating system if you can. That's just the way I feel. And I used to not feel that way. I feel that way now, though. So Microsoft Windows has had a variety of versions. And you could go through the history of their versions, going back to 3.0 and 3.1, and then like the 95, 98 ME, and then like XP, Vista 7 and 8. You know, and various reception for, you know, sort of marketplace reception for these different flavors. ME was not well received. Windows 8 is not being well received. Windows 7 and Windows XP both have been well received. Vista was sort of mediocre, but that's Windows. We also have Linux operating system. And Linux was created by a guy, Linus Torvald. This guy right here created Linux. And it's open source software. What does that mean? Open source software means that a whole bunch of people work on it for free and make it for free. And so there's this movement with software called open source, where, you know, developers in their off time can contribute to a project that people in the world are working on because they're interested in it, and just because they want to make something neat and cool together outside of a corporation. And so Linux is actually created without any corporate governance or guidance, and it's a really strong, awesome uh, operating system. And again, you can see down here it has influences from Unix and also Berkeley software development. So if you wanted to download a version of Linux, there's a couple of different flavors you could get out there, Red Hat being one of them, but the most popular flavor of Linux for your computer, and which we installed in previous week, I think, one of the previous videos in one of the previous weeks, is Ubuntu. And you can just download Ubuntu right here and then install it like you saw in that other video. Other operating systems that are out there for iPhones, you have the iOS operating system, and there are images iOS. And here you have a little information about iOS and Wikipedia. And then there's the Android operating system, which is also for mobile devices and other cell phones. You can read about the Android operating system here. It's again Linux-based, so a lot of influence from Linux here, an operating system designed for touchscreen mobile devices such as smartphones and tablet computers. And it's developed by Android originally, which Google backed financially and later bought in 2005. So kind of cool. And then back in the day, it's important for you just to know about DOS, the DOS operating system, which stands for Disk Operating System. Though colloquially, a lot of people refer to it as DOM operating system because there's a command line prompt, DOM operating system. And this was what this is what Microsoft was originally selling to IBM. And is this the video where I'm going to tell you about the lie that Microsoft told? Yeah, I'll tell you about it now. So what happened was Microsoft went and met with IBM, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer and a few others. And when they were meeting with them, IBM said, we need an operating system. Do you have an operating system? Can you sell us an operating system? And IBM was looking to enter the personal computer marketplace. This was in the, late 70s maybe or early 80s. And so, they needed an operating system to sell their computers, their hardware. And they asked Bill Gates, do you have an operating system that we, can buy off you or use? And Bill Gates said, yes, we do. But he didn't. He didn't have an operating system, but he said yes. And then that was the lie right there. He didn't have an operating system, but he said yes. At least this is how the folklore goes. I wasn't there. And so what Bill Gates did was he said, look, I don't want to sell it to you, but what I will do is license it to you. So every time it's installed on one of your computers, I want you to pay me $5 or $10 or something. And so they left, and his buddy partners, his business partners were like, what are you going to do? We don't have an operating system. So Bill Gates went and found somebody who had one and then bought it from that person for like $50,000, which back in the day, a house cost $25,000. And so he bought it for basically $500,000 in today's dollars. And then he took that and he kind of worked on it. And that was DOS, Disk Operating System, DOM operating system. And he licensed it to IBM, and he made pocketfuls of money. One of the greatest fortunes ever amassed in the history of humanity, and it was based upon a guy who was good at playing poker. And when somebody asked him, do you got an ace in your hand? He said, yeah, I got an ace in my hand. He didn't have an ace in his hand. They asked, do you have an operating system? He said, yeah, I got an operating system. He didn't have an operating system. He just went and bought one, and then he did have one. So, and then he was able to license it back. So just kind of an interesting fact from the history of computers. Last operating system to know about is the ZOS, which is the one created by IBM for mainframe computers. So that's a little bit about operating systems and some of the operating systems that are out there in the marketplace today. Important thing to know is basically Mac, right? We got Mac and we got Windows. And then, I like these pictures better. We got Mac and then we got Windows. And so those are for PC, those are for desktop laptops. And then we also have Linux, right, which is like the alternative if you don't want Mac or Windows. And then for phones, we either have iOS, which is on the iPhone, or we have Android, which is on most every other phone that's not an iPhone, right? So those are your phone, your mobile phone, your cell phone operating systems. And then finally, we have DOS, which was the original operating system Microsoft sold to IBM. All right, so that's some of the operating systems that are out there in the market today.